Go, I believe. Thank you for your time again. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah.
But yeah, the whole idea behind this segment is to have a very free flow conversation. I really don't want it to be like question answer type of a dialogue. So I just want to have a conversation or dialogue about a few things that I would love to pick your brain on. Since I've been following you guys literally since you've released Danger Wildman. So it's been a journey to witness the progress with your group and, just your artistic evolution throughout the years. Considering what I've always found very compelling about you is the very sheer and raw emotion that has been, expressed through so many different ways and with so many different influences and meanings and in general through leading to such a great artistic value and essence. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts in terms of how you evolved as an artist and as a person throughout your music career, and how everything you've experienced through this time led to developing Tower Decay in the way that it sounds and in the way it feels.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think so much of it for me developing and evolving as an artist comes so much with just practice. Mm-hmm. I know that probably sounds pretty tired out, but for me, like thinking back to the early recordings, and I think a lot of the sort of pitfalls of our early sound and whatnot was not having the experience or even the knowledge, the education to know exactly how to perform or the sort of creative wherewithal to know what best serves the song. Mm-hmm. I've always found that it might be backwards, but I've always found that experimenting live always feels so much more comfortable for me than the studio. I know most would figure, the studio is the time to experiment, but for me, I think a huge part of finding my voice and trying to up my game, generally speaking, as the vocalist of the band, is deeply contingent upon finding out what I can do, how I can stretch my voice. And I've always found that the best time to do that is live. So I think in terms of trying to up my game as the vocalist of Prada, it very much comes from that. I think, just educating oneself in terms of literature and seeing the world and taking things in is obviously huge to the lyrical perspective. But I think as a voice in the band, I think it's broadly experience that mostly has helped me out.
That's very interesting to hear, because throughout the years, it's so obvious that the meaning behind your music, it's so apparent to me in terms of the different philosophical and existential topics that you've covered, and it always felt to me as a listener as a journey for me to understand what you've been experiencing as a person, and rather than just just listening to music or whatever the case might be. And I guess this is what really is immersive towards everything that you do. And I'm very interested to hear what's the exact idea, and what's the idea that sparked the concept behind Tower Decay as a general product. Was it there something specific that just clicked in your mind and led you to the idea of creating these songs?
No, not specifically. I always find that it's much easier to make a record when you already have a record name. Mm-hmm. This one, John had a working title that I think we were all pretty half-hearted about. And by the time we had finished the record, we're like, okay, let's consider different ideas for the title. So it's usually hard to come up with something that encapsulates a record, especially when such as us, we are hell bent on trying to not make like a conceptual album. When we try to be conceptual, I think it's pretty pretty forthright and boldly obvious. But for songs like these, we want to talk about all manner of different topics, and we definitely don't want to pigeonhole certain lyrics to where, you could use the same set of lyrics across the album. So I think for us, we just really built momentum coming out of just working on songs while we weren't able to tour with the pandemic. And we did Z2 and we really enjoyed Z2. And I think that was really where the momentum began. And John just kept the wheel spinning to keep writing songs. And the first two were that we were doing vocals on were Sacrifice and Trapped. And I just got those and I knew we were going to do some singles and obviously turn it into an album. And I think that's really where the whole album began to bloom, and the actual creation of the song started was around late spring, summer of 2021. I guess it was about then, yeah.
I'm very curious to hear whether there was any specific process in developing the artwork, because I find it, incredibly beautiful, and I just love the, aesthetic visualization of this whole album cycle. It's very immersive. It's very striking to me as an art fan. So I'm very curious to hear what was the process of, if there was something specific in terms of creating this idea.
Yeah, honestly, we were really open-ended. Our management, I think it was our manager, maybe someone in the band had found Harry, who did the artwork, just online, really impressed us. And he did the covers for the singles, or the single artwork, for Watchtower and Sacrifice and Salt. And I guess Salt came out with the album announcement, but anyway, all the same, really just kind of threw everything at the wall. He just built out basically like books worth of artwork, just online for us to traverse through and figure what we felt best resembled the album. When I've been like handled the sort of creative director role of the album artwork, oftentimes I have a very specific idea I want an artist to create, but this time around, it was more just giving us a lot of different options. And I think, as one can see with the singles artwork, the tears and the crying upon a figure was obviously a motif that we established. And, the fact that it's obviously a monochromatic image versus, and the record is actually called Color Decay, I think really creates a stark contrast. And that felt very intentional. It definitely didn't feel like, I don't know, as colorful as we want the songs to be, and for as much depth and layers there are there, I like the contrast of this scratchy, sort of minimal cover.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting combination, as you said, because obviously it's such a intense album in terms of emotion and cover topics, but at the same time, it almost feels very peaceful and positive, at least to me, when perceiving the song. What would you say feels the most special to you in this album, in comparison with everything else that you've created in the past?
I think mostly just the sort of timeline and the ups and downs. We've certainly been hell-bent, dedicated to trying to create albums that have their highs and have their lows, and can generally, bring you through those ups and downs organically and freely. But I think Color Decay, more than The Act or any of our other previous work, the track listing and I think the different components of the songs actually achieve that better than we've ever been able to previously. It's such a, as for us, we're fans of albums. I personally don't really listen to singles online or something. If I turn something on, I want to hear the whole thing. And I think the track listing of an LP is so deeply, deeply important. And it speaks just so much, just volumes for some of the classic great albums and favorites of mine. And I think that's the standout for Color Decay, is that we were able to execute that better than we have in the past.
That's that's amazing. I guess the attention to detail is always very, very important. It makes a big difference, especially nowadays, at least.
Certainly.
And you've mentioned that you're greatly influenced by literature in general, and I've read many of your interviews stating that. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and your preferences, and maybe specific authors or books that made big difference in your life, something that really developed your personality to the way that you perceive and create art.
I think the biggest is French, probably followed up by Russian, in terms of de Beauvoir, Camus, Sartre, but also over to Nabokov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. I would say those are definitely very informative. My mother always read a lot as a kid, and my early favorites were like Edgar Allan Poe and Oscar Wilde, and eventually that turned into more like thriller stuff like Stephen King. And I don't know, I've always just been very, very driven to read. I'm happy to, I tend to read more when I'm here overseas, and I've just been going through book after book, which I just really love. I want my home to resemble that of a library someday. So it's always been extremely informative for me. I remember I once saw an interview with Tim. I think it was Tim from Rise Against, and he mentioned how he keeps a bookmark in his book, and as he reads, he'll jot down lyric ideas. And I find that I would never be able to write anything again if I wasn't consuming, fiction myself. So that's always just been so big for me. I never at all anticipated being a musician as a sort of career, which this has turned into somehow now over the last 17 years. But if it wasn't that, I was certainly pursuing English literature, and it's certainly a very huge staple and sort of fundamental element to just me as a human being.
This is such a satisfying answer for me, because through knowing your lyrics and knowing your art, I've always felt that you're a big fan of existentialism, and you've mentioned names that are very striking to me in terms of Camus and Sartre. And these writers are, names that greatly impacted my personal life and the way I perceive everything around me. So it's very interesting to hear that this is the same to you. And I'm just interested to hear what's your favorite Camus book? I'm very interested to hear that. And I'm also curious to hear, do you remember the first time that you read something in this area of philosophy? And do you remember how impacted you, or what made you think?
Sorry, I was just trying to go back and think of some Camus I enjoyed.
Sure. The Stranger is a big one, obviously. The Plaque, Sisyphus.
Myth of Sisyphus was a big one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to think of my first one. I know that Nausea I generally proclaim as my favorite novel of all time, being Sartre. So I always usually like to stick to that one. Honestly, I've gone more to de Beauvoir in recent years, and I remember I read one about her and a childhood best friend. I think that was earlier this year, last year. But The Mandarins was always a big one for me. She wrote a book about Sartre's death, I recall, that I really liked. But honestly, it's been years since I got into some Camus.
Or maybe, it might not be just his specific book, but maybe a book in this field that you remember that you read and just, created a big wave in your mind in terms of philosophy and, existence and all of these terms that are relevant to this field, you know?
Certainly. I think, you know, I more than anything, I would probably say Anton Chekhov.
Yeah.
I think that was around 2011. I was dating a girl who recommended Chekhov, and I think that started for a lot of it. But I remember Dostoevsky early on. Our former bass player, Andy, Brothers Karamazov is his favorite novel of all time. And he bought that for me one Christmas, and I've read it a few times now. So I think I probably, at least to my memory, probably started with Russian before I started reading English, or before I started reading French translations. But anymore, I mean, lately, Peter Handke, quite brilliant. I've been obsessed with him this year. Contemporary, like anything Karl Ove Knausgaard has done, a Norwegian writer who wrote a series called My Struggle, has been deeply, deeply inspirational for me. So those are some off the top of my head in terms of the early ones to some of the more recent ones.
Nice. I was just actually going to ask you what you're reading right now, but I guess you answered this question.
Right now I'm reading Sing Backwards and Weep, which is a memoir by the late musician Mark Lanigan. So I like to mix up fiction with nonfiction, and I oftentimes will read musicians' memoirs that, even if the artist has no relevance or interest to me, I'm always fascinated by musicians' stories and hearing how things used to be and whatnot, and just the wild stories, addiction and such. I started that yesterday, and I'm well halfway through. Mark Lanigan, this memoirs just blew the doors off me. I finished a book called Lungfish yesterday by is a debut novel by an American writer named Megan Gillis. I thought it was brilliant. I really loved it. And before that, I read the new Nick Cave conversation book with I think his name is Sean O'Hagan, called Faith, Hope, and Carnage. Nice. Nick Cave means everything to me musically, and in all facets. I actually pre-ordered 2 copies of that book on accident. When it was released. I had 2 different copies shipped to my house because I guess at one point I pre-ordered it and then forgot. But it was also very enjoyable. I'll certainly reread that again in the coming years.
Nice. I'll have just one book question because, I'm always so much enjoying just discussing this topic with like-minded individuals, because for me, this doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. You mentioned Stephen King as well, but do you have a favorite biographical book for a musician? Something that really strikes you as well?
Harry Brownstein's actually really spoke to me. Surprisingly, it struck me more than the Kim Gordon memoir or biography. I don't know. And I've never been interested in Sleater Kenny. But I remember that one really knocked the wheels off for me. I would love to revisit that one. I've read a number of Ian Curtis biographies and whatnot, following Joy Division, of course. Other Sonic Youth books following, their past. But Warren Ellis released Nina Simone's Gum. I think that was last year, which was really terrific. It was everything I was hoping it would be. But honestly, this Mark Lanigan book is just it's insane. It's wonderful. I'll likely have it finished by tomorrow, I think, by end of day tomorrow. But what's another one?
Nikki Sixx, maybe. The Heroine.
I haven't read that.
Really?
Is it good?
You definitely should try it out. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you would enjoy it a lot. It's very, very real and very crazy as well.
I'm sure. Actually, another one that I have in my backpack I haven't read yet is, I guess it's more collective stories and poems, but I didn't know that Leonard Cohen had published a few different works. I really look forward to getting into that one. I don't know what it's called, but again, I think it's like a short novel or poems and just a collection of writings by Leonard Cohen. So I'll be getting into that in the next week or two as well.
Amazing. Is there a moment where it feels interesting for you to read such stories, considering that you maybe feel related somehow with the musician's wife, considering that this is your career as well? Or do you enjoy it more as like experience this as a spectator? I'm very interesting to hear this, aspect of perceiving such information.
I think it's certainly more a spectator. I mean, I've never done drugs. I've never slept around by any means when I'm on tour. I would consider myself not at all rock and roll by most means. But there's something so deeply intriguing about rock and roll that I definitely love. Like, I always consider myself more of a music consumer than a music maker. So hearing these stories is just like, I mean, it is definitive rock and roll, and I find that deeply intriguing. And I just thought of an American writer, Rob Roberge. He has I guess you would call it a memoir called Liar. And I need to rewrite that one. That was another one that was, it's astonishing. It's brilliant. It's sad. It's moving. Yeah, I like slow pace, evocative, moody. I'm not much of a upbeat individual, especially when it comes to my choice of fiction.
Yeah, I completely can relate to that, honestly. Do you write, like, obviously a part of, lyrics and everything that is related to the band? Do you write in other forms, in other fields?
Yeah, I've written a few books that I've just self-published, but my recent one is called Bullet Made Tambourine, excuse me, which is sort of choppy prose. I kind of refer to it as like the poor man's William Burroughs.
That's a nice one.
Without heroin, of course, and drugs. So the one before that, Three Dots in the Guilt Machine, also a collection of choppy prose and poetry. And I'm working on a few different ones now. I've started a few novels that I've never completed, and maybe at the end of this year or early next year, I'll actually wrap them up. But yeah, I read much more than I write, as I believe is, you should listen to more music than make. I think you should read more than you write, but an active exercise for me, for sure.
Amazing. I definitely have a few titles to catch up with them. So what are the main differences for you as an individual, that you have obviously both these creative outlets, music and writing? Like, what is the thing that distinguishes both of these outlets for you? What's the difference that you get between those two?
I mean, boldly, writing a Devil Wears Prada song, the lyric needs to serve the song, it needs to serve the instrumental needs to serve the lyric. And generally the content needs to be apt for metalcore. So there are certainly parameters to exist within for the Devil Wears Prada. And I don't say that as a negative thing. In fact, I quite like the challenge of it. But writing otherwise, you're not writing to a song, you're not writing for a song, you're not writing for a vocal to be performed, you're writing. So for me, I always refer to it as going to two different rooms in my brain, or different rooms in my brain that I like to visit creatively. And with that said, the Prada room and the writing room, if you'd like to call it that, are certainly divided.
Yeah. um, what's the what's like the first activity of both these two that you've started? Was it for music? Was it writing? What did you start doing first?
Writing.
Writing.
Writing. I started writing as a kid. Like I remember like short stories, just exercises in elementary school. And I remember my grandmother being very positive about it and being very impressed. And I think that kind of egged me on and gave me some more pride with it and more energy. So I always anticipated being a writer, never at all a musician.
Mhm.
Um,
Uh, you seem like very conscious person who has very strong approach towards expressing yourself in different ways and adding value to what you do. Um, would you say this is like a natural characteristic of yours that you're just following throughout the years? So would you say this is more of a more of a quality that you have developed in one way or another?
I think there is a very real morality and avoiding ignorance. And I think just as a human being, I try to carry myself as one that likes to learn things and likes to implement better things in my life and more importantly, other people's lives consciously. So I think that's just a quality I've tried to build my own personality around. I'm certainly an emotional person and I can be entirely irrational. But at the same time, I would like to think of myself as pragmatic and at least level-headed enough, to go about my life and my actions with deliberateness and intention. Hopefully not too much of a loose cannon.
Yeah. And did you develop this interest in art and in music in writing yourself, or would you say this is an effect of maybe family or the societal situations you've been in? Like, I'm just interested to hear how this passion of yours sparked.
Again, like I always loved reading, like at least in the United States, we're brought up to, the library is a good place, like study hard, learn more, read and write, get better grades,
Of course. Yes.
I'm certainly, I'd say academically mediocre by most standards, but I don't know. I think carrying myself as I choose to very much comes from not so much my family or like my close peers or anything, but more just, I guess, just as the human being I choose to be, and how I wish to carry myself. Um, I think there's certainly something there as far as, like being a kid and or even growing older and reading stories and musicians that I aspire to and I look up to and revere. I think more of that is where I would kind of, I don't know, learn as to how I carry myself and go about the interests in which I choose.
Mhm. Amazing. So I definitely have a few more questions, and I would love to pick your brains on them. But since I've seen that we're close to 30 minutes now, do you have more time? Do you want to finalize, or yeah, how do you feel?
I gotta be getting ready for the show here soon, but I can handle one or two more. I'll try to keep it a little shorter.
Sure. No, I'm just since being such a huge follower of everything that you've done throughout the years, I'm just very interested to hear your bringing and how you became the personality and artist that you are today. So another pivotal moment that I would like to ask you about, I guess, if I'm using the term correctly, is how did your interest in music began, and what was the moments where you thought, hey, I'm good at what I do and I want to do that as a career? Was there like a specific moment in time where you just experienced this sort of self-assessment, I guess?
There really wasn't. I joined the band in an accident, is usually how I describe it.
Oh.
A different guy was trying out to sing for the band and he wasn't doing anything. So I was like, oh, just do this. And then the band was like, oh, you should join instead. So that pretty much defines my aspirations as a musician. I was just drawn into heavy music as far as being an angsty kid that felt no avenue for my aggression and my rebellion or my angst, or just the fact that I always felt so disregarded in terms of social circles and such. And really just being a deeply, terribly shy and afraid kid of everyone else. So music was my outlet. The heavier the music I could find, the more I felt compelled. And then from there, I never really, once I got out of high school, the band already had full-time touring set up. So I was like, I'm going to do this. And I've never really wanted to do anything else. There's plenty of bad days where you do anything to just be home and sleeping in your own bed and not dealing with the dramatic ups and downs and lack of control that a touring lifestyle brings. But all in all, Jeremy and I are the original members of the band that would rather be doing this than anything else. And I find different means to express myself that are very, very creative for me. But getting to perform worldwide in the Devil Wears Prada is something that just means so much to me. And I'm getting older, but I'm still always intrigued to see what we're able to do or what kind of song we can make and see either the same places around the world again or new places. It's always a pleasure to be able to travel, and that means a lot to me as well.
Amazing. What would you say is, in your mind and in your own perception, what is the biggest achievement that you've generated through your activity with the band? What's the thing that you're most proud of, when you think about your career as a musician?
I don't really have like anything like scientific or statistical, like I know we've sold X amount of records and that definitely feels nice.
Yeah.
I never want to pump my ego anymore. I'm weird with compliments. And so I certainly never wish to compliment myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm proud of with the Devil Wears Prada, and I know it's not, again, like a hard fact, but a lot of bands go away and then they'll either come back, or a lot of bands go away and never are able to come back. And I'm proud that even in the lowest lows for our bands, we've been diligent and we've worked hard and we stuck around and we haven't taken the easy way out and we haven't bent against our morals for making money. I think that's the sort of mentality that I'm most proud of. And that's kind of the backbone to the Devil Wears Prada in a number of ways, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this makes all the sense. And I honestly asked you this question because I thought that you have a more abstract outlook on the meaning of the question. So I was very, curious to hear how would you answer it. And I'm very also, curious to hear. Obviously, as discussed, you have so many different creative outlets, and as a creative person, I assume there are many moments where you get the so-called creative block, and I guess sometimes it's difficult to find inspiration or motivation to just create content, especially in the way that society works nowadays, where you have to constantly be putting something just to establish your value. And I'll be very interested to hear how you handle such moments internally. What's the thought process of you overcoming such a challenge? Because I assume that it might get very overwhelming, especially since this is your career and, a part of, a part of the internal duties. You have objective duties to fulfill with what you do.
There is certainly a necessity for that to maintain this never-ending flow of content. It's very important to keep your band relevant. It's important to, in all frankness, make money and be able to survive, pay the bills. But for me, I think a lot of that is handled well by Jeremy for the band and with our management team and a great record label we work with. So I don't think I'm I still depend upon and savor a fair level of privacy. So, when I get home and I don't want to constantly be putting myself out there and constantly saying, come to our show, buy the record, buy the t-shirt, dude, I tend to find great solace in being able to kind of log out a little bit. So that's personally how I carry myself. I know, I could probably get paid more if I expose myself more, if I created more content on the internet and whatnot. But and in a lot of ways, I'm selling a product, but at the same time, I never want to just. There's a line for me.
Yeah.
There's a line for me where I'm like, I detest the thought of stuffing this never-ending buy this down people's throat. I think it needs to hit the brakes from time to time, at least in my own personal taste.
Yeah, I think it shows such a great taste to keep just sort of an integrity nowadays, because it speaks a lot about the character of a person. And considering the consuming nature of our society, is just sometimes you have to be very careful how you approach all of this.
Certainly.
So with and this is the last thing I really want to cover, so I won't take too much of your time. But we've discussed, you're doing writing and, just giving some time for yourself when you're not on tour or when you're not working on music. But what are the other ways that you spend your time? I'm just interested, to hear whether you have any, other hobbies or just what do you enjoy doing in general?
I consider myself a deeply restless hobbyist. I love hockey, so I play a lot of ice hockey. I started a hockey brand with a friend of mine that just creates high quality apparel and product for fans of the game or players of the game. So I spend a lot of time playing hockey. I love playing guitar at home. I like to woodwork and build things in my shop. And then mostly any kind of home renovation I like doing myself. So I've renovated my kitchen. I've renovated a bathroom. I'm building a bathroom right now in my house. And I feel like that's a really nice creative kind of switch off to be like, oh, great. I don't have to creatively go about this. I can do it sort of habitually. So yeah, if I'm bored, it's bad and I'm anxious. So I like to keep busy, and I think outside reading, it's mostly hockey.
Nice. Yeah.
I like to cook too, actually. That's another big one.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference to just do something physically when you're a creative person, I guess, because it's very emotionally charging when you need to create, but just doing something with your hands, at least, talking from my personal perspective, helps a lot. So
Certainly,
it's an entirely different feeling. Okay, so I guess you have to go anyway. Do you have any final words, anything that you'd like to promote or mention? I guess it's very paradoxical to ask you to promote something, considering that we're just, we're talking about the sales aspect of things. But yeah, if there's anything that you'd like the audience just to check out, feel free to mention.
No, just I appreciate you having me, and for listeners of the band, fans of the band, check out the new record, Color Decay. We're we're very proud of it, and we'll be touring it relentlessly for quite a while. So nowhere near done yet. Plenty of Prada left in the tank.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mike. It was massive pleasure. It was great to talk to someone about literature and, authors and all of that stuff. And yeah, I'd love to do that again sometimes, but thank you, massively appreciate the time. And hopefully, I really hope that we'll be able to talk soon again.
Thank you for having me again, man. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.